Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm here with another solo episode for you today. We're going to be going over the Vikings win against the Titans and then kind of preview their Bears game coming up this Sunday a little bit. I was actually able to go down to Nashville for the Titans game. It was a lot of fun. Nashville was a pretty cool city to go to, and then also got to see a Vikings win. So that was really nice. The game overall was never really in doubt, I felt like, for the Vikings, mostly because of the strong defensive performance, right? They went up 13-3 pretty quickly, I think, by the end of their third drive, and, had overall a pretty dominant win, I would say. Obviously, there are some blemishes, and we can get into that, and, it probably doesn't feel maybe as good coming out of the game as you might want to against the Titans team, and as the score might suggest, right? Winning by double digits is always, a big win, and, it's more than what the spread was, right, in Vegas, right? So they're outperforming what, the numbers say maybe they should have with the final score. But obviously when you get down to the micro level and like break into individual moments of the game, it doesn't necessarily feel as good, right? So we're going to dive into that. And then we'll get to the Bears game later at the end of the episode, right? So first we'll start off on the offensive side of the ball. The Vikings, again, for the past however many weeks, have consistently moved the ball well. I've heard a stat, I think it was on the Minnesota Football Party, but it was probably running around on Twitter or something before that, where the Vikings had 81 first downs in the past 3 weeks, right, against the Colts, the Jags, and now the Titans. And apparently 83 is the Vikings' highest number of first downs in a 3-game stretch. So think of all the great offenses the Vikings have. That's probably since like the start of play-by-play data. So sometime in the 90s, right? Early 90s. But even then you had literally, one of the best offenses of all time in the 1998 team included in that data for sure, if it's just based on what Pro Football Reference has. So all of those great Vikings teams, the 2009 team, the 2017 team, that was awesome. The entire Randy Moss era, the entire Denny Green era, I guess, all of those teams, the highest output of first downs in a 3-week stretch was 83. This team put out 81 first downs in a 3-week stretch, right? So the takeaway is they were absolutely consistently moving the ball. And I thought they did a lot better job of actually turning that ball movement into scores in this game against the Titans. It kind of fell off in the second half, but it also kind of felt like the team was, kind of playing to get out of there in the second half and maybe run down the opposing defense or like run out the clock. I don't know how that didn't come to my mind immediately, but run out the clock more so than really go down and score, because the Titans really weren't able to get much going on offense at all from a consistency perspective. Starting off with the headline, I think Sam Darnold really had a good bounce back game after struggling the last couple of weeks. I really didn't find many blemishes with his game at all going through the tape. Like, I don't think there were many misses downfield. There was maybe one on a third down, I think, where he ended up getting sacked, where if he had held on to it, he could have gone to, I want to say it was Hawkinson or somebody who'd come open, right? There was the long deep ball to Addison that I didn't really understand. This is the one that fell harmlessly incomplete in the end zone, but he kind of left it inside towards the safety Addison was running to. And he also had Jefferson kind of later in the progression, if he had wanted to hold onto those balls. Those are really the only couple questionable decisions I had from Darnold in this game. I thought a couple of plays where he got sacked really ended up being on the offensive line pretty much entirely. And I thought that, he did a great job generally with his legs, especially early on in the game, moving, getting first downs. He was able to get out of pressure. He was able to make throws down the field. There was one throw to Jefferson, I think on an out and up, where he notably scrambled really well. Obviously the big play to Trent Sherfield, where he completely spun out of his sack, got outside the pocket, got the ball to Sherfield kind of on a broken play where nobody was open initially, right? So it wasn't like he was missing open players in the progression of the play and then scrambling. It was, he really didn't have anybody open downfield, and he had pressure in the pocket where he felt he needed to get out of there, and therefore he was able to make plays with his leg. I think he also got a first down on the Vikings' first drive or second drive or something like that with the scramble. So really effective game with his legs. From an accuracy perspective, I thought he was pretty on target all day. There were a couple of the throws to Addison, the one where Addison took the big hit and got the penalty. And then there was one earlier on the drive where Addison took another big hit, kind of got bent in half on the sideline. And I think he went out for a few plays after that. Those throws were a little high to me, so it's not exactly perfect, but any quarterback is going to have blemishes in games. And I thought Darnold had a really, really high level game in this one. Obviously, he should have had a touchdown to Nailor, right? And we'll get to Jalen Nailor in a little bit, but I think that overall, the takeaway for me is that Darnold bounced back and played really well against a defense that is a lot better than what the Vikings had faced the last 2 weeks, in my opinion, right? The defensive line in particular for the Titans was quite good, and they were causing problems all game, particularly in the run game. And Darnold didn't have the run game to lean on because there was only one designed run that went for longer than 5 yards for the Vikings all game. Aaron Jones wasn't able to get anything. He had like 39 yards on 15 carries or something like that. Cam Akers, I think, had 10 carries for 20 something yards, right? And a 12-yard gain in that. So he really only had one gain, and then he had 9 carries for like less than 1 yard per attempt, right? So really nothing doing on the ground for the Vikings. Sam Darnold using quarterback sneaks, which he did like 3 times, I think, in the game, was really the best weapon the Vikings had on the ground. And his legs on scrambles were really the best weapon the Vikings had on the ground. So all things considered for the offense, there's certainly things to clean up, and I'm going to get into the run game in a little bit as well. But from a Sam Darnold perspective, I was really, really happy with this game. So that's good to see moving forward for the Vikings. And I kind of went on a rant on the episode last week where I don't think Sam Darnold is going to be like a world-beating quarterback, right? Who's going to carry the Vikings to a Super Bowl in the playoffs necessarily. But I think he is a valid starting option at quarterback for the Vikings, and it makes a lot of sense for him to still be out there. So if we flip it over to someone who is a world-beating player on the team, Justin Jefferson, I thought had a good game despite only getting 80-something yards. There was some pretty high-level route running. To me, I really liked the outing up that I referenced earlier. It was a third down, and he kind of left the corner in the dust. And then there was a nice long blaze out where he didn't end up getting a penalty on that one, but it was a blaze out. So he runs a in route that's bending like a post or a crosser inside, and then he turns down hard and cuts outside. Like Julio Jones made this route famous. It's a very deep route. It takes a while to develop. And honestly, watching the play live, because I was in the stands up near the 50-yard line, I thought Jefferson was running the in. I thought it was covered, and my eyes kind of moved elsewhere on the play. So when Darnold threw the ball to the outside, I initially thought it was like, oh no, I have no idea who that ball is going to, because Jefferson's running across the middle of the field. So I'm concerned it's going to be a pick. And it turns out Jefferson broke him back outside and was wide open because he's such a great route runner that he's able to run an extremely, extremely difficult route to run. Like that blaze out route is really hard to sell and really hard to do effectively when you break out like that. Jefferson also had a couple of forced penalties in the game. There was the pass interference on the first play of the game where it was just on the second series, but it was early in the game where he got a 20-yard pass interference that converted a third down. On that one, again, if I go back to Darnold for just a second, like he is pushing the ball to his first read a little bit much, but like I appreciate that he's trusting Justin Jefferson, right? And trusting Jordan Addison on these plays. Like those are the guys I want you to trust. So if they're going to be your first read on a play and you're going to push the ball to them, I don't really have that much of a concern with it, even if there might have been a more valid option on that play. Like I think TJ Hawkinson ultimately broke open out of a 3-man bunch that the Vikings have run all the time under Kevin O'Connell, right? And they've been really, really effective, but he chose the alert to the side of Justin Jefferson having a one-on-one vertical route. And I'm never going to blame him for taking that in any scenario. It's kind of like the slant last week that got intercepted, except in this case, it ended up positive, right? Because it got the penalty out of it. I don't blame Sam Darnold in any case for throwing the ball one-on-one to Justin Jefferson in a matchup. Going back to that, he would have won back shoulder if the corner didn't interfere, in my opinion, on that play. So, that was another good play by Jefferson. There was a play later in the game where he got an illegal contact penalty that I didn't really think was fair on the corner. He was running an in-breaking route, and the corner initiated contact before 5 yards. Jefferson sustained that contact through his route stem, right? So he's running vertical. He's leaning into the corner because he's trying to set up the corner to break inside, which he did create a little bit of a separation immediately, but I think Darnold's throw went elsewhere on that play. And, Jefferson, in my mind, did enough to continue the contact, that it wasn't illegal to contact by the defensive back. But hey, we'll take that free penalty, right? And in the stat sheet in a year from now, nobody remembers what the specific play is. And we just get, hey, Justin Jefferson forced another first down by penalty, right? If somebody's looking up some statistic or some charting service that somehow has that. So we'll take that for Justin Jefferson, right? We'll take those wins. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight for Jefferson, even though he didn't get a touchdown in this game, was the red zone catch, I believe before the Vikings' third touchdown to Cam Akers. I wanted to highlight as really an impressive part of who he is as a player. So it's a quick in-breaking route in the red zone. Nothing really all that special. It's just something underneath that gets Justin Jefferson open, kind of with, I believe it was TJ Hawkinson running a corner kind of behind that. So Darnold had other options on that play, and he went to Jefferson. Jefferson makes a really nice catch where he extends the ball away from his body. But what was most impressive to me about this is it was first down and 10. And Jefferson makes this catch, has the ball extended away from his body. He's able to turn up field and get, or maybe it was 2nd and 7 or something, and get 10 yards and get a first down and bring the ball down to the 3-yard line, and you have first down and goal, instead of some other players might have had to stop, try to make that catch with their arms extended, have their momentum stopped, and be hit by the corner who was inside. Jefferson was able to fluidly catch the ball, extend while twisting his body forward and move down the field. And that's the kind of body control that I think doesn't get, highlighted, because it's really hard to visualize or just talk about in a quick soundbite, right? Where just the absurd body control that Justin Jefferson has on a consistent basis throughout everything he does on the football field is what makes him the unique player that he is. And I just wanted to highlight one more piece of that. So if I go into kind of the next thing I have on my list here, which is Jordan Addison's long touchdown, right? It was on a dagger concept. It was against a blitz by the Titans. So the Vikings have Justin Jefferson running some vertical route on the backside of this play, but they have Brandon Powell running a clear out on dagger and Addison running the dig underneath. The thing that worked and turned this into a touchdown instead of just like a nice 20-yard gain over the middle of the field was twofold. So the Titans saw a cut split and they blitzed the corner to the side that Jefferson was on, so the opposite side of the field, right towards Darnold. And Darnold actually did a really nice job on this play, stepping up, because Oliver really didn't protect the edge all that well against the corner blitz. So Darnold takes a step up and delivers the ball kind of just beyond where the corner would have been able to swipe at it as he went back. So it's kind of a small thing that doesn't get noticed a lot, but I thought Darnold did a really nice job on that play, and he was doing a really nice job stepping up throughout the course of the game on kind of a consistent basis. So Darnold does a nice job there, and then Addison just ends up wide open on this dig because the Titans are running cover 3, so they take both the deep safety and the outside corner end up taking Powell deep, which isn't great, and you have a wide void over the middle of the field. Usually you have 4 defenders over the middle of the field, so there's a little bit of tighter of a window that you have to fit between 2 linebackers in the middle of the field to hit that dig route. In this case, because the Titans had blitzed a corner, they only had 3 underneath routes, and the safety to the other side was capping the route by Justin Jefferson. So you have the combination of, it looks like 2 high safety pre-snap. That would be quarters. It rotates into cover 3 because they blitz the corner, who is kind of on the line of scrimmage there, maybe looking like pressed a little bit. And then when Darnold hits Addison in stride of the middle of the field, he doesn't have players in underneath zones kind of muddying those throws. So he delivers a perfect strike in stride. Addison, as he catches it, now has the deep safety over top of him. He has another safety, but corner kind of to the outside on the far side of the field. And a corner that could have been there in a different type of coverage isn't there because he's blitzed, right? So really, as he goes to the opposite corner, the only person he has to beat is the safety on the far side of the field with his speed. And that safety stumbles as he's trying to recover and get after Addison. And it gives Addison an easy corner to get around and get a 49-yard touchdown. So really, the things combined, I thought on the play really helped Addison score, but obviously it was a phenomenal play by him. So great combination to lead to the long Addison touchdown. And I believe that was the Vikings' first score of the game. So it was a great way to, the first drive they fumbled, obviously, but they opened up the scoring in that game, right? And they took that lead and never looked back in the game. So really fun stuff on that touchdown there. The next little topic I had, because it's been a little bit of a point of discussion, I think, in the Viking space over the last couple of days, is Jalen Nailor obviously had a big drop on a post route. Is he a great wide receiver 3 for the Vikings, or is he somebody that they need to look to upgrade on, has been kind of the general question or the general theme of discussion. For me, I think Nailor has been a really useful part of the Vikings offense. I don't think he is, a receiver on the level of Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison, right? I don't think he's a pure starting top 2 receiver in your rotation, but I do think he has provided a lot of value as a receiver 3, right? We're talking about drops here, and there's been a couple notable mishaps in the last 2 games specifically, and I think the fact that it's taken touchdowns off the board, right? There was one against the Jags where I thought he was late to come out of a route, and then this one, he wins on the post. The ball is like a half step underthrown by Darnold. It's not perfect, but he has to make a little bit of an adjustment coming back to it. And he needs to catch the pass. He really should have caught the pass, but he wasn't able to bring it in. So we've seen those 2 mishaps, but we've probably forgotten by this point that he started out the season with 3 touchdowns, right, in the first 3 games. And it wasn't all he got schemed open on a couple of those touchdowns, right? So it wasn't all he was doing the work, but he was pretty productive when Addison was out and the offense was humming and they were consistently moving the ball. So I think he's a valuable part of this offensive ecosystem, and I think his speed absolutely makes a difference. His ability to get vertical and threaten the defense vertically helps open things up for Addison and Jefferson underneath, right? And Brandon Powell was okay at that. Obviously, I talked about how Brandon Powell ran off the defense in the touchdown that Jordan Addison had in this game, but Nailor, I think, has a little bit more of a consistent speed element where it's a threat that defenses have to respect. And even though he dropped the pass, right, he got open behind the defense, and that's still a threat that teams will see on tape and have to respect moving forward. So I do think there's a lot of value for Jalen Nailor. I don't think, he's a starting quality wide receiver, but the Vikings are, he's a 3rd-year rookie, so the Vikings aren't paying him like he's a starting quality wide receiver. So it's kind of a moot point to me. We can have a discussion about what Nailor might command when he's going to hit free agency after next year, but that's not a problem until the 2026 offseason, right? So for right now, I think Jalen Nailor, especially for what he's getting paid, is providing a lot of value for the Vikings as a 3rd receiver because he provides a vertical threat that allows you to run Jefferson and Addison on other routes. And if you want an underneath reliable receiver who has, a sure hands, let's say, you can still go with Brandon Powell in certain short yardage situations or things like that. So maybe the Vikings need to rotate Brandon Powell in a little bit more depending on the situation that they're going. But I think in their base offense, when they go into 11 personnel on a 1st and 10 play, Jalen Nailor is still a great answer for the Vikings to have on the field, right? Because even if he, has some mishaps here and there and has some more drops than we'd like to see, I think the drops are probably a little bit of a variance problem because of a low target rate, right? We're talking about something in the order of 20 targets so far on the year for Nailor. So it's not going to be oh, he had 100 targets and he has a crazy high drop rate on 100 targets. No, it's we're talking about 20 targets. So one drop, changes your drop rate by 5%. And I'm just pulling up here. Jalen Nailor has 26 targets on the season, right? So every drop he has changes his drop rate by roughly 4%, right? Because 125 divided by 100 is 4. So at the end of the day, I'm not too worried. He's had a couple rough games recently, but I think we overreact kind of in the moment to things that are happening, and it'll smooth out over the course of the season to where he's still going to be a quality piece for the Vikings, in my opinion. Something that was not a quality piece for the Vikings, and, it is, I guess, could be another question moving forward, is the run game in this game. The Vikings were absolutely awful on the ground. If I'm pulling up the numbers here real quick, they were, they rushed 32 times for 82 yards. 33 times for 82 yards. And 8 of those attempts were Darnold. So if I pull up just the running back runs, it's 25 attempts for 69 yards, right? That is not good at all. That's less than 3 yards per carry. Like I said, the longest run was Cam Akers on a 12-yard game, which I thought was a nice run by Akers. He was able to move in a couple different directions laterally to find space to make that run happen. But other than that, he wasn't getting anything done behind the line of scrimmage. And Aaron Jones, honestly, it was really interesting watching the game because Aaron Jones obviously had the fumble at the start of the game. That's a very bad start where he's just dropping the pitch. You can't have that happen. To me, it's not something that I'd be like, oh, this is going to be a repeatable problem. Obviously, we throw a ton of pitches on those types of runs throughout the season. We've done that a lot throughout the season. It hasn't been a problem for him before, but it's a negative when it comes up. So you got to bring it up, right? Unless he drops another one, I'm not going to advocate for a change in that kind of situation. But really the Vikings run game as a whole kind of fell short. I thought Jones, like I said, went down after contact a little bit easier than he has in previous games. I don't know if that could be, and this is just pure speculation, like lingering effects from the injury that, he missed some time in the Jags game last week. I think that's probably not it. I think it was kind of a combination of bad luck in this place and good play from the Titans on the other end. I thought the Titans run defense was really phenomenal. And, I'll get into it from the Vikings side, but the Vikings also completely shut down the Titans run game, right? So it wasn't like the Titans were running all over the field and the Vikings weren't able to get anything going on the ground. No, neither team had absolutely anything going on the ground. And I think it was just, that was kind of the game it was. I do think the run blocking was probably not as good as it's been in previous weeks. You had guys who would create initial holes and then not be able to sustain blocks. So there's creating an initial hole for the running back to run through. And I thought Jones had a number of juicy looks early on in the game, but then it would be I think about this from the defensive perspective. Harrison Phillips does a phenomenal job all the time. And Luke Braun started this, but I've been tweeting it a bunch, of having his moment of zen, right? Where he takes on a block and is on a offensive lineman's shoulder and then sheds that lineman into a different gap and tackles the running back in that gap, right? So he creates the illusion that a specific gap is open, and then he shuts that down when he's reading the running back and shedding the lineman. I thought the Titans did a phenomenal job of doing that on their side of the ball in this game, right? So it looked like the linemen were in good position, and it could have been literally anybody. It was Bradbury, it was Brandell, it was Risner on a couple plays, it was O'Neal. It happened to all of them, where they ended up getting a run shut down because they were unable to sustain the block against the defender that they were blocking. And look, it's not that easy to sustain blocks of against defenders. The rules are against you as an offensive lineman in terms of holding, where you have to let that guy go when he tries to shed in the opposite direction, or you're going to grab his jersey and a flag is going to get thrown. I also thought the tight ends struggled a little bit in the run blocking game. There was one notable play where I thought Hawkinson kind of lost. And, just in general, the interior defensive lineman, Tavondre Sweat, and Jeffrey Simmons, the guy everybody in Vikings land wanted, had a great game. There was a play, the play on the goal line that got stopped from Jones. James Lynch made an appearance and made a huge play against where he just kind of overpowered or got better leverage on Cam Robinson. So it was kind of interesting to see James Lynch in there, but it was really the Titans defensive line and then their linebacker level did a good enough job filling and getting the tackles that, the Vikings really weren't able to have any sort of success on the ground. So, overall, that's kind of what I thought happened in the run game. I would say, and I'm going to get into Dalton Risner in a little bit. I would say that I don't think Risner has the same push that Ingram has in the run game. So there were a couple runs maybe where if you have Ingram in there, it would have gone better, but I'm about to talk about the pass protection. And I thought Risner did a lot better job than Ingram has been doing there. So it's the kind of the trade-off when you make to do that. But I will also say that despite maybe not always getting the movement that we might want, I did not think that Risner was the culprit on like the majority of run plays or something in terms of why they weren't working. It was kind of across the board. It was almost everybody's turn on a kind of a roulette wheel in terms of what failed for the Vikings run game. So, and I thought he had a couple pretty effective blocks in the run game too. So it's not like Risner specifically was the reason the Vikings, kind of went down a little bit and were completely inefficient, I guess I should say, in the run game in this game. But just the whole offensive line and blocking unit in general was more of the problem with me. If we flip it over to the pass protection side, I thought the Vikings had a pretty good game in pass protection. I complimented Darnold on a scrambling earlier, but I thought there were a couple instances where he did kind of have a clean pocket and could have hung with it, and just decided to get out, or a couple of the instances were really coverage scrambles, right, where there was nobody open downfield. So time's running out and the offensive line is blocked pretty well, but he still needs to get out of there just because, you end up losing over time, right? You can't protect for 5 seconds on every single rep. I thought that the left side of the line, including Bradbury, was kind of the main culprit. I thought Blake Brandel had a pretty rough game. In general, I thought Cam Robinson had a pretty rough game. And that's not to say that I don't think that they're valid starters. I just think they struggle a little bit here, and Bradbury struggled a little bit, especially against some of the bigger players in Tavondre Sweat with some of his rushes and picking up stunts and that sort of thing. He just lost ground a little bit more often than I would have wanted. And that's what led to a couple of scrambles and a couple of the sacks at the end of the game. The biggest play that sticks out is a play where 4 different linemen lost, and it was it was a sack. I think it was the second Darnold sack, or maybe it was intentional grounding. I think it was the second Darnold sack, and I think the sack was by Arden Key. But essentially on the play, Brian O'Neill loses first to Harold Landry on a speed rush, and that forces Sam Darnold to work up into the pocket, and then Risner lost pretty quickly to Jeffrey Simmons to his inside. So that forces Darnold kind of back. So he steps up and then kind of has to step to his left. And then Cam Robinson eventually loses around the edge, starting Key, and Key's the one who comes off and makes the sack, right? So it's kind of a full unit failure on that play towards the end of the game there. That was the sack that knocked them out of field goal range, and it happened almost immediately. So it was a sack. It knocked them out of field goal range on their second or third to last, I guess, the second to last real drive, right? Because the final drive was just 3 runs and they were out of there. But yeah, so they were in field goal range, between the 30 and 35, and they had a 3-yard loss to Akers, where Akers really could have done nothing on the play. They just kind of got beat immediately, and they had a 9-yard sack. Both of those on the offensive line. I thought they really struggled toward the end. Like I said, Darnold wasn't under pressure a ton. I think it was only a quarter of his snaps. So early on and throughout most of the game, I thought the pass protection was good, but it did kind of fall apart while they were trying to ice the game away. Notably, I thought Brian O'Neill also had a little bit of a down game for him, and he played pretty well over the course of the game, but I did have him losing twice to Harold Landry on that speed rush and what could have been sacks if Darnold didn't do a really good job of stepping up in the pocket both times. The first time he ended up getting sacked, obviously by Arden Key, but the second time he ended up getting sacked by Arden Key. But I think the first time it was a nice downfield chunk, and it might have actually been on the blaze out to Justin Jefferson. I can't remember exactly what play it was. But overall, okay game from the offensive line in pass protection, really bad game from the offensive line in the run game. So it was probably one of the worst offensive line performances, honestly, all season from the Vikings in this game against the Titans, which kind of makes sense because they do have a really good defensive line. Like, I don't want to sell that short. Jeffrey Simmons obviously is a great player. T'Vondre Sweat played really well in this game, I thought. And Harold Landry, I think, has always been underrated as a pass rusher personally, but Arden Key also kind of surprised me a little bit with how he was playing it and the motor that he played with. So overall, really good performance from the Titans defensive line, forced the Vikings to struggle a little bit on the offensive line. And then if I go to the final portion of the Vikings offensive line, right, Dalton Risner specifically, kind of mentioned a little bit, but I thought he was fantastic in pass protection in this game generally. He had 2 losses. Neither of them resulted in the sack. Well, one of them, again, resulted in the sack, but it was when 3 people lost, right? So it's kind of hard for me to be like, that's terrible. Outside of that, he only had 1 loss, and it was on a quick game throw earlier in the game. Jeffrey Simmons got inside of him. He got an arm up to where Darnold might have been, but I think this was a completion to Justin Jefferson on a quick pass for like 4 yards, right? Darnold was easily able to get the ball out. Risner did enough for there to be time to get the ball out. It was a little concerning in terms of a loss in pass protection, but it wasn't a major issue for me. And then I kind of went over what he was in the run game. I think that he doesn't generate great movement. But he also wasn't usually the reason that the runs failed in this game. Like, I think the majority of plays were on other linemen, and they were typically to the left. So that actually could be a little bit of an indication, though, because if the Vikings aren't as comfortable running to the left when they don't have Ed Ingram in the field, that could be a little bit of a bigger negative in the run game than I'm talking about in general. Like, I thought Risner was certainly more than acceptable and startable in the run game. So, I was pretty happy with this performance, and I've never been a guy who's like super high on Dalton Risner or somebody who was super high on starting him over Ed Ingram, but I think his level of play in this game warranted him continuing to start for the foreseeable future, right? Unless it really takes a turn, because I do think some of the losses Ingram was taking, especially how quickly he was taking those losses in pass protection, were like a major issue that could lead to, some pretty bad things down the line in terms of Darnold taking quick sacks, and you get forced fumbles that way, and it just doesn't turn out well. So, I guess I wasn't necessarily calling for Ingram to be benched. And honestly, until after the game, like, I was at the game live, I wasn't really, double checking the numbers of all of the offensive linemen in the game every snap. And I was up, on the 3rd level. So it wasn't like I was super close to see that it was Risner instead of Ingram. I didn't even notice that Risner was at right guard until people had mentioned it after the game. I was kind of more focused on what was happening downfield. So, I never saw a major loss live from the right guard, so it never prompted me to figure out that right guard was actually wearing 66 instead of 67. So I think that's a pretty good sign for Risner that I really didn't think he was a problem throughout the course of the game while watching it live. So with all that being said on the offense, I'm going to flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. I thought that once again, outside of the elephant in the room with a 98-yard touchdown, right? Like, we're going to get to that. But outside of that single play, the Vikings had an absolutely phenomenal game on defense. Even if you include the play, they still had minus 18 EPA per play, which is lower than any minus 0.18, I should say, EPA per play, which is lower than any team has for the course of the season, right? If you look at any team's EPA per play throughout the course of the season from rbsdm.com, they're all higher. I think the lowest is like in the 0.152 range or something like that. So 0.18 is abysmal in terms of EPA per play for an offense. And that includes the 98-yard touchdown. If you take that touchdown away, it's minus 0.32. Now, I was going to try to tweet something out where it's like, if you take that touchdown away, Mrs. Lincoln, right? How's the play? No. If you take that touchdown away, the Vikings actually match their EPA per play that they forced the Jets into and the Jags and the Colts into over the past couple of weeks. So, and the Giants into week 1. So the Vikings have put up absolutely absurd EPA per play numbers on defense in 5 of their 10 games so far this season. It's ridiculous. They've held their opponent to minus 0.32 EPA per play or less in those games. The opposing offenses have just been absolutely inept in those situations. And then the Vikings also held the Titans to a 25% success rate. That meant that only 1 in 4 plays for the Titans were successful. That's not even 1 per series, right? 1 per set of 3 downs, or 1 per 3 and out. So the Vikings absolutely dominate. That success rate of 25%, I believe, is the third low. I heard this, maybe it was the Minnesota Football Party, was the third lowest success rate from an individual game. It was either that or Norse Code, from an individual game this season, which is absolutely absurd to think about, right? Like, the Titans could not move the ball on a down to down basis at all. They did actually end up with 2 successful runs, because they were like 3rd and 1 and 2nd and 1, and they went for 3rd downs, but they gained 2 yards and 1 yard on that run. So, right, even though they have successful plays, they really weren't long. So before I get into kind of more specifics on the run defense and the pass defense in the game, though, I want to go over the 98-yard touchdown, because I was like shocked when this ball was caught. First of all, it was a little bit of whiplash, because you thought that the Vikings had kind of gotten a safety on the first play. Like, we were so far up in the stadium that's kind of hard to see the specifics, but it really looked like, I think it was Spears on the run play. Maybe it was Pollard, was very unable to get out of the end zone. And on that play, like, Jalen Redmond did a great job of getting in the backfield immediately. Bullard got in the backfield immediately. And I think Tiller made a play on the ball too. Like, it was just the Vikings beat the Titans inside. We're right at the running back, like, kind of a abysmal blocking from the Titans. And kind of an abysmal design led to almost a safety from the 2-yard line in the run game, which is really hard to do, I think, if you're the offense. So, you get that, you get the sneak, you're like, okay, the Vikings are going to stop this and they're going to force the punt. And they come out, and they're in 2 high. I think it was cover 2. It might have been a Palms type coverage. No, it had to be cover 2, because the corner stayed shallow in this. And watching it live from off top, and as you can see on the all 22, Josh Metellus absolutely has an angle to go get this ball. And I don't know if it was the light, because there was kind of a shade coming across, so the ball might have, Levis was in the shade, and where they caught it was in the shade, but if you threw the ball up in the air, it went in the sun. So I don't know if Metellus lost the ball in the lights or something, but you can clearly see that he stumbles on this play. Like, he really should have been underneath it as a cover 2 safety, intercepting this pass. Like, I don't think there was anything wrong with the call from Brian Flores' perspective, because you had everything covered on the play. This was a deep vertical route with a deep out route by Calvin Ridley underneath, and the corner on the play, I think it was Stephon Gilmore, took the out route by Ridley. Levis just chucks the ball up in something that I thought was going to get intercepted pretty easily. And then you see Metellus not play the ball right. He stumbles, he falls to the ground. Nick Westbrook-Akina makes the catch, and he runs, 98 yards for the touchdown. So, really unfortunate play, but to me, it's just all on Metellus misplaying the ball in the air and not being able to find the ball, right? Metellus isn't typically our deep safety, but I think we had him in on that play, and I don't think Bynum was on the field in the play, because that's what the Vikings will do sometimes. They'll rotate, and usually it is Bynum that they rotate off the field, although Metellus will come off the field and Smith will come off the field for certain situations. When they need to go with a heavier package on the defense, right? When they need to go with more defensive linemen, because, the thought might be the Titans are trying to run the ball here, just, get a little bit of space and get, first down. So you want to have 5 defensive linemen to protect against the run, but then you have Metellus as a deep safety, kind of, right? Where Bynum's a lot better in that regard, I would say. So a little bit of a miscast, maybe you want to keep Bynum in the game in that case and take Metellus off the field. But at the end of the day, it's kind of just a big mistake turned into a touchdown. And it's fortunate that it really didn't affect the course of the game, because the Vikings were already up by enough, and the Titans just were unable to get absolutely anything else going on offense. So, that's that long touchdown. But if I flip it over to the star of the show, I would say was the Vikings run defense, and particularly the edge rushers in this game. Like, a lot of the season has been Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Bullard doing a really good job over the middle and kind of making those plays in run defense. In this case, I thought the edges were great. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is that the Titans were running a lot of read option, and the Vikings just shut it down. I think the first read option play was one where Levis took it for a first down, right? But Harrison Smith was right there, and the Vikings were running kind of like a veer play, right? So you have the fake handoff, and then they had a speed option, kind of pitch option. But Smith shut down the pitch option and was also able to tackle Levis for a 3-yard gain on the first play. They got them a little bit, but it wasn't really, that bad. It ended up with first down, but, it is what it is. But you look at every single other one, and whether Levis makes a pull read or a handoff or a give read, like, it's a positive play for the Vikings defense, because first of all, on the pull reads, you had a player crashing down. It might be like Pat Jones crashing down. And then you had Van Ginkel on one as an off-ball linebacker, just completely crushing a tight end block, where he was kind of pulling over to lead Will Levis. Van Ginkel crushes that block, makes the tackle in the backfield. Grenard had a play where he played both the running back run option and the quarterback. It ended up being a 2-yard loss on that, where he went down for the running back and ended up being able to change direction and go to the quarterback. It was one of the most fluid moves from an edge rusher I've seen. It was Danielle Hunter is what I call it, because Danielle Hunter was also phenomenal at doing something like that. So the fluidity and the explosiveness from Grenard in that play was awesome. Harrison Phillips, I think, had a moment of zen play on one of the read option plays, right, where it was actually a handoff, but he was the one who ends up making the tackle and the run stop on the play. I call that Harrison Smith. Pat Jones also had a nice tackle on Will Levis after the option, or maybe it was on the running back after the handoff. I don't remember offhand, but, great play across the board against read option. I don't think Will Levis is probably the read option quarterback you want to play with in the modern NFL. Like it used to be, you could have, I remember the Eagles back in like 2013 with Chip Kelly had Nick Foles get 20-yard chunks because nobody was able to account for the quarterback on the read option, just because it wasn't as prevalent in the NFL as it is this time. I think that Will Levis, even if he's a decent athlete, right, and he's got some strength and he's got some speed, he just doesn't have the twitch that you need to get out of there, and beat the players that, like, the edge rushers that the Vikings were putting out there, who are able to kind of cover both sides. The Grenard play really sticks out as a way where if you have a lot quicker runner, right, like, obviously I'm not trying to compare, Levis to like a Lamar Jackson, right, but Lamar is so quick and explosive out of his movements that he's able to get around edge defenders who otherwise are able to play both sides of it. So, I think situationally or decision making wise, it's not all that smart for the Titans to run read option. And then I also thought that the Vikings played it great when they did. I thought the tight end blocking from the Titans was abysmal in this game. I thought their offensive line blocking was abysmal in this game. Like, they are just not a good team at blocking, which is funny because it was supposed to be something that they were kind of going to be better at now that they hired Bill Callahan, but I don't think they really have the personnel to do that all that well. But there were so many plays where Vikings edge rushers were just defeating blocks by tight ends. There was a nice play, and there were also nice plays in the backfield by Cashman and Pace on the play where they're just able to defeat tight end blocks. Pace had a really violent play where he beat a tight end block, kind of went just right underneath it too, made the play in defense. It's Ivan Pace. He's great going forward in the run game. If I flip it over to the passing game for the Titans, I thought that the Vikings used man coverage a lot more in this game than we'd previously been seeing. I charted 7 sacks of pure man coverage for the Vikings, or 7 snaps of pure man coverage. Freudian slip there because they got 3 sacks on those 7 snaps, and on the other 4, the Titans went 1 for 4 with 21 yards. The 21-yard gain, you might remember, was back shoulder fade to Calvin Ridley, or slot fade to Calvin Ridley against Byron Murphy. Murphy also got a PI on the play, and I don't even think it was terrible coverage by Murphy at all. He just didn't. He was a little bit late to play the ball. Ridley played it well, timed it up really well with the quarterback, and he got a little handsy there. I didn't see it up close. I'm sure the television replay would have shown an actual PI from the stands. Like, it looked like a pretty typical all 22 of a decent defense on a back shoulder play, but it's kind of hard to tell, right? So Ridley made the catch regardless, so it didn't really matter. So the 3 sacks and that one reception cancel out for the Titans gaining exactly 0 yards on the 7 reps that the Vikings ran man coverage. So really good ability to play man coverage. Obviously, Calvin Ridley's the only real threat on the Titans offense in their receiving core. That was evidenced by the fact that the Vikings ran one double a couple times, right? That's their way to double opposing receivers and shut them down. They ran one double and Levis wasn't able to find anybody else in those situations, right? So Ridley, the only receiving threat. None of the other players on the roster really are all that worthwhile from a route running perspective. So, that's how you kind of shut opponents down in man coverage on a game. If I go to the Harrison Smith interception, the other big play by the Vikings defense in this game, to me, it was just an absolutely predetermined throw by Will Levis. I think he had the ball. They're desperate. They're down 10 points. They need to score twice. And Will Levis predetermined it and said, I am going to throw the ball deep. And it was a quarters coverage, I believe. Yeah, it was quarters, and the Vikings just bracketed it with, the deep routes bracketed by the outside corner, who I think was Gilmore again, and Harrison Smith. Levis chucks the ball up. Harrison Smith makes the play on it that I guess Metellus wasn't able to earlier in the game, right? And he gets the interception. So, nice play by Harrison Smith, but really just more of a poor decision by Levis than anything else to me. I think that, if we want to talk about a couple of the blemishes, right, and I think this is what leads to the feel of the game being a little bit more negative than it too, is the Titans had a couple of really big plays called back due to penalty, right? So the Torian Prince is like an NBA player. Isaiah Prince is the right tackle. I don't really know what the deal was between him and Nick Petit-Frere. In terms of they definitely switched him at some point during the game, but like later in the game, Petit-Frere was in again, so I don't really know what the situation is. But Petit-Frere let up like 2.5 sacks, and Prince let up a sack, and he had 3 illegal formation penalties, right? So the Titans' right tackles throughout the course of the game were not having a good game. And you get illegal formation penalties as an offensive lineman because you are trying to set up to help get you into your kick step to get enough depth to block around the edges, right? So you're really struggling in the game to block the opposing defensive lineman. You try to cheat back a little bit, and they threw the flag consistently, right? So the first play that got negated was a big Ridley post that would have gone for a 51-yard touchdown. On the play, I think that on the Vikings' other side of the field, they were supposed to rotate into some sort of non-traditional cover 2 where either Shaq Griffin or Byron Murphy was supposed to go deep. Neither of those guys went deep. I would say it's probably on Griffin if I had to guess. And what Byron was playing was in Tampa. So it's a non-traditional Tampa. You have 2 deep players in cover 2, right? It's supposed to be a deep coverage that stops things like post, but Bynum played it a little low, which you are supposed to do, and you're supposed to let the safeties handle the post in that kind of defense. Smith got too far outside, was just beat massively inside, really ended up wide open. I think if Murphy or Griffin, honestly, it was hard for me to tell. My guess would be Murphy, just on face, that they like to ask him to do that a lot more than they like Griffin, but it wasn't exactly clear to me from the distribution by the Vikings defense who it was, right? So if Murphy plays that as cover 2, I think he's getting back there and able to play the post a little bit better. So it was definitely a mishap and a coverage miss by the Vikings defense. Obviously a negative, but they got bailed out by the illegal formation penalty. You also had the Nick Westbrook-Akina play in the, which was a little bit later. And that one was a cover 3 blitz where, you had 5 guys rushing. So if that sounds a little bit familiar, they hit Nick Westbrook-Akina on a dig over the middle of the field, just like kind of the Addison touchdown in the game, right? So cover 3 blitz, you end up with one fewer defender over the middle. And in this case, Pace was the underneath zone. He was actually in good position. He just didn't get enough depth. And to be fair to him, he started the line of scrimmage, right? So he needs to get back really hard. He was in the line of the throw, but he didn't get enough depth or didn't have enough height to knock the ball down, and it goes over his head, and it's like a 20-something yard gain. So, obviously I guess a little bit of a disappointing play does get called back. So that was a positive. There was another play where the Vikings ran cover zero, which they didn't run a ton of it in this game. And I think this kind of forced them out of it a little bit, but the Titans decided to throw deep against cover zero, right? So Levis is dropping back. He's getting hit. And the ball goes deep against the cover zero, and it gets caught for like a 33-yard gain by a guy who I had never even heard of before. To me in this, if you watch the play, you can see that Griffin is a little late to respond to the fact that the routes going deep, and he stumbles a little bit getting into it. So he has to play catch up, right? And he's majorly behind on the play. The Vikings need to do something to be able to, and it's kind of hard, right? But I'd be willing to give teams things in like the 15-yard range on when they're running cover zero. If it's like a 3rd and 10, right? Give them things just past the sticks, but have an either or in terms of stop plays before the sticks or go deep, because there's been a couple situations where they've allowed like 10 yards on a 3rd and 10, right? And just allowed a first down because they weren't able to get up quickly enough and make the tackle. There was a play early in this game, I think, where actually Okonkwo got a tackle and it was like a 3rd and 12. Maybe it was like the first 3rd down of the game. Because Griffin didn't come up far enough, and the tight end, I think it was Okonkwo, was able to extend past the 3rd down marker. Like, I'd rather see it be a little bit more, okay, we were playing tight, to like 8 yards or something, and then running with you deep if you run past us, and we'll allow kind of the intermediate stuff, but we want to stop everything before the sticks, and we want to stop everything deep. I don't know how functionally that would actually work in a game, right? I'm not an NFL coach or defensive coordinator or an NFL player, so I can't tell you if that is actually a real answer or just something I'm kind of like hopiuming, like trying to say that, oh man, this is really how I think they should play this, right? So that's kind of my thoughts on that type of play. To me, it's not necessarily a long-term concern. I kind of talked about this with the defense a little bit last week, but at the end of the day, they are going to struggle a little bit against good offenses. Everybody struggles against good offenses. Teams consistently score 20 plus points once they get in the playoffs because it's really hard to stop the really good offenses in the NFL. Even if you have an elite high level of defense. So the Vikings right now are absolutely performing at an elite level against everybody they've been playing against recently, right? Granted, those teams have been very bad in Joe Flacco Colts, the Jags with Mac Jones, and now the Will Levis Titans, but they've been doing about everything they can, and they've put out phenomenal game after phenomenal game against these guys, right? So they are a really good defense beating up on really bad opponents, but that's okay. Like, you're going to face really bad opponents and you have to beat up on them. And the Vikings are able to do that right now. The last thing I wanted to get to, actually, which was pretty exciting, was the 5 sacks that the Vikings were able to get in this game. So they're generating a ton of pressure. I think they had 17 total pressures, and they were doing it without, I mean, they were blitzing a lot, right? They had about a 50% blitz rate, but it wasn't time after time after time. So I thought that the sim pressures that the Vikings were running were actually really cool and maybe not unique or new, but a little bit of a different wrinkle from what Flores has done previously, right? Where I talk about all the time with the 7 guys lined up on the line of scrimmage, you have the cover zero blitz. There are all those rules. The Vikings recently, over the past couple of weeks, have been running a ton of double A stuff. And, they've had 6 threats on the line where it's similar to double A, but oftentimes they'll have like a linebacker in the B gap or something like that. Recently, they've been doing it where both linebackers are in the A gap. So Cashman and Pace are walked up into the A gap. And it's very reminiscent, obviously, of what Mike Zimmer did during his time here. And they've got a whole bunch of different things that they do off of this. So they had the traditional, you see which way the center turns, and whichever of the 2 linebackers the center turns to, he drops back into coverage and the other guy goes, and then his matchup against the running back. That got pace of pressure early in the game. You have 2 sacks off of this, both with different styles of pressure. They're simulated pressures. So simulated pressures when you put multiple threats on the line of scrimmage, but you only rush 4, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be all four of your down linemen. You can drop your down lineman in the coverage. It's still a simulated pressure at that point, but it's showing more threats than you actually send when you only send 4 and still having 7 players in coverage on the back end. So the Vikings are very good. And I talked about, they had 3 sacks in man coverage of doing this with double A gap pressure, playing man coverage in those situations. And a lot of times it was third down. So the first sack was a Blake Cashman sack, and it came because the Titans got confused on their offensive line on who was supposed to block who. So the Vikings present 6 threats along the defensive line. It's the 4 edges, right? So it's Van Ginkel, Grenard, Pat Jones, and Jihad Ward. And then you have Cashman and Pace in the middle. The Titans only have, they have 7 guys because of the tight end able to block as well. And there are really 2 different ways that you can block this. You can do what's called full slide. So, you have everybody blocked down. In this case, they would have done it to the right, to the person on your right. So your left tackle, Latham, blocks Ward, right? Who's to his left. And the left guard blocks the linebacker Pace, and the center blocks Cashman. And then the right guard blocks, I think it was probably Jones. And then the right tackle blocks Van Ginkel, right? And then you have the tight end over by the left tackle and the running back coming across the formation to double team against Jonathan Grenard, right? Who's the best threat, but he's also furthest from the line of scrimmage, right? So that's why you would have a tight end and a running back blocking, the Vikings' best pass rusher, is because A, you get a double team when everybody has a one-on-one, and then B, he's the furthest player from the quarterback, so it should take him the longest to get there, even if he might be the best player on the Vikings defense, right? So that would be one philosophy in terms of full slide protection. And then there's also a half slide protection where you have, and this is how teams will typically respond to double A stuff, where you have your running back coming up to block one of the linebackers. You have the center turn to one of the other linebackers and then kind of wall off those 3 players to that side. And then you have one-on-one blocks to the backside. And the Titans had a tight end in to help chip on Grenard if it was the left tackle. But as this play develops, this was Cashman's first sack. It was a loss of 10 yards. He was unblocked on the play. You can see that the left guard, Peter Skoronski, is not on the same page as both J.C. Latham, the left tackle, and the running back, Tyjae Spears, because Spears is coming across the formation as if he's going to help the tight end block with Grenard. Latham blocks down towards Jihad Ward, and also Skoronski tries to go block Jihad Ward. So that leaves, Ivan Pace kind of unblocked to his right, but also Blake Cashman. Cashman was on the right, Pace was on the left. So Cashman comes in unblocked. Nobody tries to block him because either Spears was supposed to come up and block him or Skoronski was supposed to come down, but he's actually running a stunt. So he angles to his left towards the running back who runs past him and then just turns to the quarterback. You see Ivan Pace on the other side go attack the center and then loop around. So the center who's looking to his left doesn't recognize the stunt quickly, has no chance to pick up Cashman because I don't think he's really working with the running back and trying to get on the same depth and level as the running back. I think he thinks Skoronski is supposed to pick up that play, right? So he doesn't have the depth to be able to pick up Cashman. His head turns super late because he's not expecting the stunt at all. And Pace almost came free on the stunt. Spears did recover a little bit and got a piece of Pace, but obviously Cashman had already sacked the quarterback. So just really impressive design, I think, from the Vikings on that. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight, is 2 other things I want to highlight. So later in the game, they had another play where they actually they came up with the same 6 across the board. The Titans showed, they walked Spears up, or maybe it was Pollard actually up in this case. And it was Pollard to the line, right? So that shows that Pollard is going to be assigned to block one of those 2 linebackers, as opposed to earlier in the game when Spears was in the backfield next to Levis, right? And tried to come across. So he would have either had to come up or to block the lineman, or he can go across to block Grenard. And in this case, Pollard has walked up more towards the line of scrimmage. You see this a lot on third downs from teams, right? When they're seeing these blitz looks. So the Vikings know that those 2 guys are blocking the guys in the middle of the field. They drop Pace and Cashman out, completely wasting. Now you have one-on-one matchups on your outside for your 4 rushers. Again, the combination of Pat Jones, and this was Pat Jones' second sack, by the way. Pat Jones and Van Ginkel to one side, and Ward and Grenard to one side, right? So the way the Titans blocked it, they slid the center over towards the Ward and Grenard side, and then the running back released out. So it was just a one-on-one with the left guard, Dylan Radins, I believe, and Nicholas Petit Frere, as the right tackle on that side. So the Titans there do a terrible job of passing off the stunt. Pat Jones gets upfield quickly. I think he beats Radins just flat out, kind of up the field, and then uses a rip move to get around him. But Radins was also not on the same level as Petit Frere. And it didn't look like he was trying to pass off the stunt. Like, he leaned into Jones and kind of turned upfield towards him, which to me indicates that he was trying to block it like man on man and just got beat to the outside. Petit Frere realizes it's a stunt when Van Ginkel lays off, but Pat Jones is already inside him. So Jones just beats him to the quarterback. Like, he gave it a shot, but Jones beat him on that play. To me, it was kind of more on the right guard than it was on the right tackle in that situation. But, still another sack with just a pure win from the Vikings pass rusher. There were a couple other sacks in the game by Jones and right. So I covered one of the Jones sacks. I covered the Cashman sack. Jones had another sack in the game which was just good rush lane discipline. What the Vikings were doing was really trying to cave in the left side of the Titans offensive line and get Levis to step up in the pocket over towards his right. And it worked twice, where the Vikings had Pat Jones take a wide path against the offensive tackle, right? Try to go around him and then cut back down inside and close the lane for Levis to step up. So they took an inexperienced quarterback, gave him an appealing option in terms of, okay, I know I should be stepping up in the pocket when I have some pressure or I feel some pressure. Like, I don't want to run back out around it. So I need to step up, and I have this wide lane to step up into, and maybe I can make something happen. Well, they slammed that door shut immediately by having their pass rusher take a wide path to that side and then cut back inside. Pat Jones got a sack that way. One of the Van Ginkel sacks was that way. And then the other Van Ginkel sack I thought was just really impressive. He came against chip help. And he started out really wide on the play and got chipped by a tight end. I think the tight end was a little bit detached from the formation, chipped him. Van Ginkel comes in really flat and then has the quickness to get around and just hit Levis hard on the play. And it was good coverage on all those plays. The coverage and the pass rush really combined for a successful ability to stop and get those 5 sacks. But I just kind of wanted to break down those sacks on the podcast here. If you want more pictures with total explanations and the coverage and what the Titans are trying to do on offense in those situations, I did come out with an article in Zone Coverage that came out on Tuesday, going over each of those 5 sacks in about as much detail as I possibly could. So go ahead and check that out. So with all that, that's kind of the Titans game, right? A lot of stuff to go over. I was really impressed with the overall defensive performance. And again, I was really happy with how Sam Darnold played on offense. So I thought it was certainly the most complete game that the Vikings have played since before the bye, probably really since, I don't know, the Packers game, right? In week 4. So encouraging sign to me for the Vikings. They've been in a little bit of a funk, and I don't think they're fully out of that funk, but I think they're kind of working their way out of it a little bit here. So we look ahead to the Bears game this weekend. It feels weird that the Vikings haven't played the Bears yet. I feel like usually they play a little bit earlier in the season. It's just an absolute disaster of a game at Soldier Field. But here we are. First game against the Bears. They're going up against, Caleb Williams, who, if we want to draw parallels to Will Levis, it's a young quarterback who might hold onto the ball a little bit too long, right? So that's going to be the big question in the game. Obviously, the Bears have had a really rough time of it this season. They started out really, really poor on offense. They had a couple of nice games against abysmal defenses like the Panthers and the Bengals, where everybody got all hyped about Caleb Williams. And then they fell back down to earth completely and kind of back into the earth, probably almost, with some really poor performances, leading them to them firing Shane Waldron, right, 2 weeks ago. So they had a little bit better performance against the Packers last week. They still only put up 19 points. I really didn't catch any of the game because obviously I was at the Vikings-Titans game, and I don't really feel like going back to watch it. But from what I'd seen of the Bears prior to that firing, I think it was really a whole unit failure. And I don't think that it was necessarily all on Caleb Williams. Like, I think he's probably a little bit overwhelmed in terms of too much has been put on him throughout so far through his rookie season, right? Like, I think you need to ease guys in just because the NFL game is a lot more complex than what you see in college, even if he's a really smart player and can do good things. But I think the most underwhelming part of the Bears is the offensive infrastructure and the help that they've been able to provide him. JT O'Sullivan does an absolutely phenomenal job with QB school, right? He does probably a Patreon video on the Bears like every single week. And obviously he's a former quarterback. He's a big offensive guy. He knows a lot about offense and just completely lambasts the offensive architecture on a consistent basis. So I haven't seen what the Bears did against the Packers yet, but the biggest question to me is, do the Bears have an answer or good answers for the Vikings blitz, both from a pass protection perspective and route design off of that, right? If you look at the Bears Vikings second game last year, the Vikings ran Hawk like 15 times and the Bears threw a screen every single time into it. And that's just not a good answer to the way the Vikings play defense, because the Vikings are prepared for those screens and rep that so often that they're really good at stopping those screens. So, and obviously it was a different offensive coordinator, and now the Bears have an even new offensive coordinator from the guy they started the season with, but like their offensive answer to what the Vikings were doing on defense was not good. So that's the biggest question to me is, can the Bears come up with better answers for what the Vikings are doing? We just saw the Titans do a really poor job of that. The Lions earlier in the season did a really good job of it. You want to be more like the Lions than you want to be like the Titans. That's a very obvious statement for the current NFL, right? Maybe in the early 2000s, that's not something you would have wanted to hear, but you want to have good answers for what the Vikings are doing. There are some answers for what the Vikings are doing. And look, there are answers for everything a team is doing on offense and everything a team is doing on defense. It's just being able to execute those that kind of makes the difference in the game. Being able to find those and execute those and call those at the right time, that makes the difference. And the Vikings have been doing a very good job, particularly on defense, of shutting down opposing offenses, right? So do the Bears have that answer is my main question. I don't think they do, because I think their offensive line is really, really bad. I've never been a fan of Braxton Jones, the left tackle. People were fans of Darnell Wright and thought he could improve coming into the second year, or his third. No, this is his second year. After, an up and down performance, I saw him get beaten like a drum by Danielle Hunter, in the 2 games that the Vikings played him last year. I was never really particularly high on him and his performance last year. And I don't think he's really improved very much at all. I think you see quit from the interior offensive line on certain plays. And then if you go to the wide receiver room, right, you have a bunch of names in DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, and Keenan Allen. And I think Roma Dunze is probably the best player in that receiver room right now. DJ Moore is just, paid like a top receiver in the NFL, but he is not the number one receiver that Justin Jefferson is. He's not a high level receiver like an AJ Brown or like, some of the best receivers you think of in the NFL. He's really more of probably best as a secondary option in your receiver room, but he gets heralded as that top guy. And that was kind of all the hype on the Bears coming into the season. So I think the wide receiver room is relatively overrated, especially for what people thought of them coming into the season, right? Saying, oh, is this the best situation a number 1 overall pick has come into? It's clearly not, right? And that's kind of proven out. Cole Kmet doesn't move anything. I think Keenan Allen is pretty washed at this point. I hate DeAndre Swift as a running back. Like, I just don't think he's a good player. I don't think he makes consistent reads. I think he can break tackles, but that's pretty much the only thing he is going for him. And I don't think he breaks tackles at the level to warrant paying him certainly $8 million a year. Like, I think the Vikings got a much better deal with Aaron Jones than the Bears did with DeAndre Swift. So overall, I think a lot is on Caleb's shoulders and maybe Thomas Brown's shoulders to have a cogent plan for the Vikings blitzing And I just don't have a lot of faith that that's going to happen. So I think the Vikings should be pretty successful on defense in this one. Now, certainly, like I said, there are answers for this. So if the Bears are able to actually turn around and have those answers, then more power to them. Like they might do a great job, but just given the relative strength of their offensive line, I think they're going to, and the poor decision making by DeAndre Swift, I think they're going to really struggle to get anything going in the run game, just like the Titans did last week. And I think that's going to put them into bad situations where the Vikings are able to heat them up with with blitzes and stunts and that sort of thing. And I don't think their offensive line is going to be able to hold up long enough for Caleb to go through a massive amount of reads. Now, Caleb has playmaking magic, but I think we've seen over the course of the season that he doesn't have the escapability that he had, like maybe in college at USC, right? Where he tries to move out of the pocket and he can move around and create extra time, but he gets caught after a certain amount of time. Like I think at USC, he was able to move around, kind of run around in the backfield and get runs or release a ball deep downfield for a big play. I don't think he's able to get to that point just because he doesn't quite have the level of athleticism as like a Jaden Daniels or something. So he needs to be a little bit more quick and judicious in his scrambling, in my opinion, to get the ball out quicker once he does, right? You escape, you find your best option and you get the ball there. You don't escape, wait, try to go back around and make a play all the way on the other side of the field consistently. So, it's certainly possible that he finds that magic again and the Vikings aren't able to tackle him. And it's like a Matthew Stafford getting the touchdown to Cooper Kupp, right, in the Rams game. And that just happens over and over and over again in the game. But I don't think that's super likely at this point in Caleb's development. So overall, I feel pretty strong about the Vikings defense in this game. If you flip it over to the offensive side of the ball, for the Vikings, I just think this is going to end up being a low scoring game. The Bears defense, I still think is really good. Their secondary, with Jalen Johnson as the primary starter, I think Jaquan Brisker's still out with concussion, which absolutely sucks. Like he's missed more than half the season, I think, with the concussion at this point, which is really, really scary stuff. But, they have, oh man, I'm blanking on who the other safety there is. But they have, decent players in the secondary. Outside of that, Tyreek Stevenson obviously got in the doghouse a little bit with that Hail Mary play against the Washington, and deservedly so, right? Like that was awful, but they can cover guys on the back end. And the Vikings have struggled to get the ball to Justin Jefferson against the Bears in previous matchups, right? So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to play Justin Jefferson. Jalen Johnson, I think, is a really good corner and can help slow down Jefferson with some help. And the other guys are good enough, I think, to maybe potentially slow down the rest of the Vikings receivers as well. And then the question becomes, are the Bears able to generate pressure, right? Montez Sweat kind of blew up the game the last time. Obviously it was with Josh Dobbs, but he kind of blew up the game the last time the Bears played the Vikings. And that was ultimately one of the big reasons the Bears won that game. But last year the Bears didn't really have anybody generating significant pressure outside of Sweat. This year, I think Gervon Dexter, who's the second-year player, has been playing a little bit better, and he is the guy who I pose as a candidate to get more of those pressures, from the interior, and obviously that's somewhere the Vikings have struggled to block over the course of the season. So if you have one guy who's able to generate pressure, I'm not really too worried about you as an opposing offense, right? And this was the Vikings last year where they had Danielle Hunter and absolutely nobody else who is really worth it as a pass rusher, where you can find ways to shut that guy down. Like the Vikings will be able to find ways to shut Montez Sweat down if they want to dedicate themselves to doing it. If the Bears get a secondary guy who's able to get those pressures once they shut Montez Sweat down, like a Gervon Dexter, that's where it becomes problematic for the Vikings in the passing game. So the Vikings, I think, have great designs on the offensive side. I think the pass protection throughout the course of the season, it's maybe struggled a little bit with the last couple of weeks. Obviously, you're going to struggle more when you lose Christian Darrisaw, but even beyond that, some of the guys in the interior, I think of Brandell in particular, have struggled a little bit more. But Generally, it's been pretty good. If the Bears are able to get a significant pass rush in this game, that could be throw a major wrench into what the Vikings are able to do on offense, right? And Darnold had been holding on the ball a little bit long. I think he kind of did a lot better job against the Titans in that. So we'll see if that's able to continue moving forward. So I talked a lot about the pass defense there. I think they're elite, but the Bears run defense has not been very good. So they are one of the bottom teams in terms of EPA per play. In run defense, they've allowed 4.8 yards per attempt. So hopefully the Vikings are able to get movement in the run game and run the ball on this Bears defense. And I think that could really help them win the game if you're able to sustain drives, make Caleb feel like he needs to make the magical play when he gets down in the game. And you're able to consistently move the ball and generate those first downs time after time. Running the ball early on first down, maybe not the best thing in the world, but if you're able to get consistent gains, it's great because it keeps you in short down and distance situations, right? So the Bears defense overall pretty good. They're 8th by EPA per play, but only 15th in DVOA. So that's still not a bad defense, but it kind of shows the difference between the level of opponents that the Bears have been playing over the course of the season, right? And a lot of that's similar to who the Vikings have been playing recently, but the Vikings are the number 1 overall defense in both EPA per play and in DVOA, right? So obviously the Vikings have not necessarily been bolstered by the teams they're playing, whereas the Colts, when they put up good games against the Tennessee Titans, where they end up winning that game, where they put up good games against the Indianapolis Colts, where they end up winning that game, where they put up a decent game against the Patriots or good games against the Jags and Panthers, who are awful, or the Rams, who didn't have Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua in the game. Like, those are kind of the teams that the Bears have been putting up their good defensive performances against. So they're not really all that high level. So that's why the DVOA adjustment looks at them at like the 15th best defense in the NFL, whereas EPA per play is like 8th best. So hopefully the Vikings, who are a middle of the pack offense by most metrics, I think they're 17th in DVOA, somewhere in that range in EPA per play as well, are able to move the ball enough, and the Vikings defense is able to be stifling on the Bears, and it ends up in a win. I certainly don't expect this game to be a blowout. I would expect there to be, a little bit of struggle for both offenses on either side of the ball, which of course means that it's going to be like a 30-28 game or something like that. And teams are going to be scoring a ton of points. So, I don't have, like always, I don't have a ton of confidence in a particular prediction, but those are kind of my overall feel of the game. Like, the Vikings should be able to shut down the Bears offense. If they don't shut down the Bears offense, I would expect it to mostly be Caleb making magical plays kind of on his own, or the Bears finding really good answers for some of the blitz looks that the Vikings did under kind of their new offensive coordinator in Thomas Brown. And if the Vikings struggle on offense, I would expect it to be due to a pass rush generated by Montez Sweat and maybe somebody like Gervon Dexter, and then also really sticky coverage from the secondary level, where I think the Bears have some pretty good players. So that's kind of either side of the ball there in that game. And I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Kindred Skulls. So I am Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. I'm on both Twitter and BlueSky now. I have had a BlueSky account for a while, but I never really tweeted or skeeted, I guess is what it's called, on it. But I'm trying to do that more now. I didn't post a lot of game content from the Titans game on Twitter. I posted that over on BlueSky instead. So please go follow me over there. My @ is at Fries Football, and then they have the .bsky.social or whatever it is. But you just search at Fries Football and you find it there. Nick, my co-host at Nick Olson NFL, is not on BlueSky yet, but he is on Twitter, obviously. And Kindred Skulls is at Kindred Skulls. And I just created a BlueSky account for that as well. So you can please go ahead and follow that over on BlueSky, as well as on Twitter. So we're available, and I'll be tweeting out it kind of concurrently, right? So I'll tweet out episodes when we get it on Twitter, and I'll skeet it on BlueSky, I guess, right? So we're available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also available on YouTube. It's just Kindred. The name of the channel is just Kindred Skulls on YouTube. And with that, Skull Vikings.